Now, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest in the series of CBAA webinars brought to you with the assistance of the Community Media Training Organisation, our respective websites, cbaa.org.au or cmto.org.au. Tonight's webinar is how to manage your community radio station's music library. I am very happy to be joined this evening by two wonderful colleagues of mine, Chris Johnson, who is the Head of Programs and Services and AMRAP Manager, and Chelsea Dealey, AMRAP Assistant and former Music Director at 89.7 Eastside FM in Sydney, and still a presenter on that wonderful, wonderful station, bringing you a whole bunch of great Australian music. Chris is, of course, Head of Programs and Services at the CBAA, includes management of the Australian Music Radio Airplay Project, and if you don't know AMRAP, then you should really get acquainted. AMRAP distributes new Australian music to community radio and empowers broadcasters to promote Australian artists on air and online. Chris will tell you more about that. But if you're not using AMRAP, you really need to get involved right now. If you've got people there in your local community who are makers, creators, performers of Australian music, then you need to get them signed up to AMRAP as well, because it's an absolutely wonderful project. I've seen it grow in leaps and bounds over the last few years, and it continues to grow. And it's an absolutely wonderful thing to be a part of. Chelsea Dealey is the AMRAP Pages and CD Mail-Out Coordinator here at the CBAA, working with hundreds of stations to gather and coordinate music. Chelsea was, of course, Music Director at Eastside Radio and still produces and presents a wonderful weekly program. Very happy to have you both here with us. Chelsea and Chris, do you read me? Are you out there?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
We're ready to go. Thanks for the warm introduction, Danny.
Who should I give it to first, Chelsea or Chris?
Well, if you'd like to share my screen, Danny, we'll share my screen for the duration of the session, and from time to time, Chelsea and I will alternate between talking.
Excellent.
So, you should have just received my screen, guys.
I can confirm it is there.
Fantastic, excellent. All right, so look, thank you very much. There's quite a few of you who've dialed in. It's always a bit odd, I must admit, presenting in a one-way fashion, talking and wondering what the hell people are thinking out there. But really, doing a webinar is not that much different from radio when it comes to that. You do your best, you put it out there, and you hope that you can be as informative as possible. So as I mentioned, Chelsea and I will alternate throughout the session. We would really welcome your messages in the form of questions. So you'll see the message box. Danny may have touched on that in the introduction. And by all means, we'll gather up those questions. We might check, say, halfway through, Danny, and in with you on some of those questions and answer as many as we can. Great, and then we'll get to the rest at the end. So excellent. Welcome, Cynthia. Nice to see you've arrived as well. So let's get into it. Really, when it comes down to it, music makes up 70% of content broadcast on the average community radio station. It's a lot. It really is a lot. And what we're going to do through this session is take a different approach to music library management. And we think that a different approach needs to be taken because the world has changed very much in the last 40 years since we started community radio, and particularly in the last 10 years, in the way that people can access music and the decisions that they'll make around who they choose to devote their ears to. In other words, who they choose to listen to and who they choose to trust in terms of their music. Not only is that going on, but as I'm sure many of you would have experienced, it's a bit of a mishmash right now between physical music and digital music, between CDs and vinyl, maybe even cassettes for some, and digital music libraries. So this session, in some respects, it may lead into future conversations that we'll have with you. And we really do invite you, as you step through this, to consider how you'd like to follow up with Chelsea and myself to work out a strategy that suits your station, that can help you develop a music library management system, and also ensure that your station is remaining relevant and of value to your community through music, which once again is well over half of what most stations put to air at the end of the day. So there will be some tips along the way. There will be some mention of some products, but we're not going to go straight into those. We're not commercially focused on this one. It's really about taking the first step that many stations have perhaps not fully realized at this point, to be able to make decisions around what sort of music library they should have and what sort of approach they should and could take towards music to make their lives easier and the program makers more fulfilled and the listeners more entertained and informed. So with that in mind, I'll pass over to Chelsea now, and we'll get stuck into some things. We'll go pretty quickly, but these slides will be available. And as I mentioned, we really do encourage the opportunity for follow-ups after this webinar with you guys on a per station basis.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you. So many of you here from such a wide range of stations as well. So I'm hoping that you'll all get a little bit out of tonight's session. And yeah, just to echo what Chris said, definitely follow up with us if there is anything that you'd like to discuss with us further, and we can give you the information that you need, or at least try and point you in the right direction. So basically, just as a bit of a starting point, getting straight into it, your music library is of huge importance to your station. Essentially, it has to be said, I guess quite a number of program makers, it is potential at different stations may very well have access to their own music collections, but on the other hand, there would be an also equal amount of program makers who would regard the station library as crucial, which is exactly why your station library's sole reason for existence rather, is to fulfill your station's purpose, which whatever that may be, that is exactly what it's there for. The effectiveness of your music library, though, is completely lost if it doesn't align with or even feed into your station's identity. And if it's not doing that, then program makers are going to be less inclined to use it and therefore rendering your library a little bit useless. So we're going to go through some things that you can kind of look at to attempt to avoid this. And there's a number of different factors to consider. Essentially, you know, there is, for the stations who may already have a music librarian, they may be doing a really fantastic job, and they probably know exactly where the organized music is. You know, they've organized it perfectly. They know probably where to find specific artists, specific releases, or at least have an idea of, you know, where they might be and point you in the right direction. But I guess the real test, which you can put to your station library and the way that the librarians are putting it together, is, does anybody else know where the music is? Do your program makers know when the new additions have been made to the library, or in fact, what is in it to begin with? How do you know if they know? Have they played the music on air? Have they told you that they've, you know, seen the new releases, that they've enjoyed what you've added to the library? And does anyone care? Does anybody care if the music you're adding to the library, if it's not relevant to their interests, if it's not feeding into the sound and the identity of your station, then why are they inclined to go and look at it? And how can you tell if they care about it? You know, have they aired it? Have they given you feedback? And have your listeners given you feedback as well? That's another really important factor into it. So it's enough to make you really quite question the librarian's efforts and whether it is, you know, kind of living up to its full potential at the moment. So it might be time, if these questions have, I guess, provided a bit of an uneasy feeling, or you're maybe not sure how to answer them, or maybe, you know, the honest answers aren't maybe quite what you're hoping for, it might be time to do a little bit of a station health check. Actually looking at the following questions and really, you know, attempting to hone in on what the problem may be. What is the purpose of the music at your station? And it's definitely not to fill time between talks. You know, as we saw from the very first slide, it provides a very integral role in your station's life. So first up, what is the purpose of music at your station? Is that the licensed purposes? Is it in keeping with those particular purposes? That might be, you know, are you focusing more on Australian music? Are you trying to provide some Is the purpose shared by everyone? The station board and the broadcasters are really quite important to consider. Are all program makers proactively adhering to the purpose of the music at your station? Are they playing music that fits in with your station's identity and purpose? Does the purpose match what's needed in the community? It's super important. What do the listeners think? What do the people who listen to you and are with you day in, day out, what do they think? What is their feedback? And then finally, does the purpose enable the station to grow with the community needs, particularly in a changing media landscape, which we're going to come to in just a second? So then move to consider the music that does get put to air and how it services what is needed in the community. Do you have a community that thrives on supporting local talent? You know, is it a close-knit community with a lot of musicians? You know, are you kind of putting a spotlight on these people? Does it lean to promoting music of a specific culture or a specific genre of music as well? And does it provide an alternative to other music sources? Does it give listeners sounds that they wouldn't get from maybe commercial radio or even other stations or music providers in the area? And we're going to go into that a little bit now with Chris, because that is potentially going to be a bit challenged at this point.
It's this area, before we get into the nitty-gritty of library management, that's really important to consider. And that is that the role of music on radio stations and the role of radio stations has actually changed quite a bit in people's lives. And I'm not talking about this being an older generation versus younger generation view. And one thing I'll also say is that when Chelsea and I refer to new music, we're not just referring to like brand new music, brand new artists. We're referring to music that would be of interest to your audience that maybe isn't getting the rotation that it deserves. There's a whole heap of music out there based on genres, across eras, that is being overrepresented on radio. A whole heap of artists that are just being played by everyone. Is your music library actually giving you a competitive edge over other stations by ensuring that other suitable music is getting up into the airwaves and therefore attracting and maintaining your listeners and inspiring them in different ways? So something I just want to touch on about this is, even if you've felt that historically the way that music is chosen on your station and the music that's being aired is useful and suitable and appropriate, it's about to be quite significantly disrupted. Now, I wonder at this point, guys, maybe if you could type in the message box if you've ever used a music streaming service online. That might be Apple Music or Spotify or Pandora or SoundCloud. Okay, yeah, Tanya, great, excellent. Feel free, just type in yes if you've done it. Yep, here we come, a whole heap. All right, let's look at this. Okay. This is research that was done by Pandora, which is a digital music streaming company that are global, and they've been quite aggressive into getting into the Australian market. And they actually provide music to a lot of shopping centres, and they've got millions of subscribers as well. Now, this is data that they've gathered just recently. The average Australian spends 3.4 hours listening to audio. Now, that audio is defined as the elements that are shown here in the key: AM, FM radio, streaming, online music videos, podcasts, audiobooks. Now, thankfully, radio has 52% of the market. Okay, so as of this year, just over half of the audio being listened to is radio. The reality is that none of these other platforms really existed 20 years ago. So prior to that, radio and personal owned music were really the only two major sources that people got audio and, broadly speaking, music from. But now there's all these other services. And what's interesting is the streaming services have taken 11% of the audio market share in just 5 years in Australia. So since Spotify and Apple Music have formally launched in Australia, they have taken over 10% of the audience's ear. Now, that has a major effect on the decisions you'll make around music. Let's just break it down here to clarify. When we talk about streaming music services, what they generally let you do is that you'll pay a subscription, or you can get it free of charge with ads placed in between, and then you can find and choose the music you want to play. Now, the issue with that is that it's not just about a personal music collection, it's millions upon millions of songs that you have at your disposal that you can choose a la carte. On top of that, what streaming services have done to compete with radio quite effectively is to generate what they call playlists, which is based on the individual user's music tastes. Now, this has enabled people to set up a streaming service on their phone or on their computers, press play, and let it decide on the music that they want to hear. If they don't like a song, they skip it, and it remembers that preference. So the next songs that they hear in the future are more likely to be closer to their musical tastes. So this does affect things for us as radio makers, and it certainly shifts the way that music will be considered, because it's now a scenario where the user can choose what they want and they can access almost anything. Now, the other thing to consider is that the way that people listen to radio has generally been this red zone, okay, with the peak listening times being through breakfast and then it dropping off throughout the day. However, streaming services, people are listening consistently throughout the day. And what we're finding is that people are tuning out of radio at other times of day. Radio is still quite dominant in the car, but the fact is that when people choose to access music, they're in the office or elsewhere, they're often turning on a streaming service instead of turning on the radio. Now, I don't want everyone to be, overly worried about this, because the fact is that local content, local talks, news, information, and supporting great music is still going to give you a competitive edge. But it's important to appreciate that this will affect the way that your music library can be managed and the way that you could approach working with music. And we can see here finally that streaming services, which is the green areas, generally the older you get, the less likely you are to be using those streaming services. But that is changing as well, and that is growing. And I can personally tell you that, my parents live in Hobart. I live in Sydney. They listen to a community radio station, Hobart FM, for the past 20 years. Me and my brothers bought my mum a tablet for Christmas so that she could use that for emails and didn't have to put up with Dad sharing the laptop with Dad. I put a streaming service on it. The next time I went back to Mum and Dad's house, Mum was playing the country music hits off the streaming service for most of the days that I was there, and Hobart FM wasn't on as often anymore. I felt terrible for that, being a community radio lover myself, but let's face it, Mum was now getting access to heaps and heaps of music that she'd never heard before, plus a whole heap of her favorites all coming up through a streaming platform. So look, we've got to accept it. Radio is not the only jukebox in town anymore. Your music library and the process you have around that matters more than ever, and your skill in selecting songs for airplay is more important than ever. Not only is it the skill that allows that in managing your library, but the skill that program makers need to choose great music to attract people and engage them. Okay, so let's, in summary, around the station health check before we get into the other bits. We think that what you should look at doing before you even look at your library is to develop a station music mission. Now, we'd suggest the following things. Your music mission clearly outlines the purpose of music at the station, okay? It also outlines how your music mix, which might be a way of describing a mix of genres, certain eras, certain styles, how that music mix supports the purpose, keeps your station relevant to the community, keeps your station on track with your license and the codes of practice. Also, how your music library and management systems will help program makers to achieve and maintain the mission. And we'll touch on that a bit more deeply in a moment. And then finally, why the music selections made by program makers and music coordinators need to support the mission. So you might have jumped onto this thinking that we were just going to give you a road test of products. We will show you some products, but what we'd like to suggest to you guys, and we're happy to follow up, is that you look at this station music mission, and if you need to discuss it further with board and with management, that you can grab these slides, you can follow up with us. But I think it's worthwhile now that community radio looks at having a music mission, because we're not the only jukebox in town anymore, and we need to make sure that the music is really effectively engaging and our audience and attracting future listeners, because it's quite competitive. Good to hear, Graham. Glad you couldn't agree more. So with that in mind, we need to ask that big question. How are you going to get program makers to use your library and follow your music mission? I'll flick over to Chelsea for this one.
Chelsea, are you on at the moment? Because there might be a bit of a problem with your microphone.
Sorry, I think I accidentally not pressed a button that I meant to press.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
You're back on now.
Sorry, as I was going to say, so essentially with just following on a little bit from what Chris just said, with the station's music mission, it's really important too, because you can actually turn the station's music mission into I guess, the sort of on-air campaign. It can be something that you can promote on air through promotional stings and promos that you can play throughout a multitude of different programs across the day and across the week. So it's really important to note that, playing the music and also promoting the fact that you're playing the music is going to play to your strengths and engage your audience. Okay, so next we're going to go on to how to get your program makers to use the library and follow your music mission. And it's quite, there's a couple of different points that are really, really key. The first is that it really needs to be functional and sustainable. It needs to be a good system with a good process in place to maintain it. And it must be said that, a volunteer who would like to, would like to jump in and help out with this is super crucial, because sharing the workload is going to make things less arduous and really going to also engage the people who are involved in the station a little bit more. It also must be accessible for program makers, so that you can remove the excuses of, oh, I don't know how to get into it, I don't know how to use it. Like, it really needs to be something that can be used across a bunch of different skill sets and different kind of technological abilities as well. Once you've got those two things in place, then you can really start to educate and really communicate about how your program makers can use the system and why it should be used to support the music mission. Because if they don't really understand that, then they're probably not going to use it, and then everything is kind of a bit lost. All right. Yep, no worries.
Okay. Right, we're getting closer to looking at the nitty-gritties of how you can manage your music. But one thing to consider now, you can put a whole heap of work into putting a music library together, but if there isn't a useful music mission that's defined at the station, and if you don't have buy-in from the program makers and they're not motivated and truly believe that it's worthwhile, then you'll probably end up with program makers not really using the music library, not really playing anything new, and chances are they'll be playing the same old stuff that they've been playing forever. And once again, I'll say, to be honest, if people want that, they'll find it now on a streaming platform. Now's the time for you guys to make sure that your listeners really feel inspired by the music you're choosing. Okay, so you've got to be honest at this point and potentially challenge others at the station to be honest with themselves about where the station is right now. Is the existing library accessible, organised and used? One of the challenges we have found over the years is that stations have had libraries that they've developed, and perhaps a fantastic volunteer has developed a library that was well ahead of its time years ago and incredibly useful for organising CDs and vinyl. But perhaps these days, it's no longer as accessible or organised or practically useful as it used to be. Time to be honest about that one, guys, if that's the case. Here's a big one. Is the library being used by people who probably need it most? The irony is, and the librarian's dilemma that Chelsea pointed out, is that the people who often are most gravitate towards libraries and discovering things are pretty keen to discover music anyway, and are going to look to create variety on their programs and variety in their music. Really, the music library in your management system needs to cater to the people who are airing the same songs and artists over and over again. They're the people who probably need it most, because at the heart of it, when a lot of people are playing the same artists and the same songs over and over again that you could turn the dial and hear on another station, it's usually because they just need a bit of help to discover other music to suit their program. We're not suggesting that, you know, the person who likes playing blues and roots should be playing classic blues and roots, should be playing all new blues and roots and jettisoning the old stuff. We're not saying that. What we're saying is that people need help to discover variety of music, whether it's old or new. Variety is important. So really the big question is the music that's being selected by individual program makers or that is currently being played out on a computer library or an automation system at your station, does it really reflect the station's license and the needs of the community? Or is it a little bit on autopilot? That's the challenging part, and the part where it's time to be honest and with ourselves and to look at the station processes so that we can move forward and develop something that's worthwhile. Okay, now let's look at the four basic library types, and there's all kinds of hybrids in between, but we've tried to make them into four clear areas. So Chelsea will give a bit of an overview, and then we'll go into more detail in each of them.
Definitely. So pretty kind of straightforward, and I guess starting from the top, the most basic one, and I would assume maybe the one that most stations probably have still, is a physical CD library. And I guess the biggest challenge is, and we actually think that this library is probably the hardest to maintain as well. The biggest, I guess, challenge with that is who can access it, when and where. Is it organized and maintained? And of course, does it encourage discovery? This is a really huge point. Something that goes hand in hand with that is a database, which basically is a listing of everything that is in your physical library. And the same kind of challenges do definitely apply. If one isn't organized, then it's kind of letting down the other, and vice versa. So it's really kind of important if you do have a CD library as well as a digital library, to really kind of look at those things, both of those things, not just one of them. Then we've also got a digital library, which I would hazard to say quite a few of you will probably have as well. This is where you add music so program makers can manually search and play out in the studio as well. A lot of the challenges that come with a physical CD library and a database of that library really kind of applies to all of these different things. It's an access issue, which, is it available inside and outside of the studio, at the station, sorry. Is it easy to navigate as well? And other things that can come into it are, are you over or underusing it? Are you adding too many tracks by the same artist? Or rather, maybe, trying to add fewer tracks by more artists? Is it easy to use for program makers both on air and also before their program? And can you find music based on genre? Super important if you have a lot of shows that really focus in on those specific genres, because if they can only find by artist name, chances are they might just, you know, go for somebody that they recognize, as opposed to actually looking at different options and looking at, you know, new additions to your library. And also a really important one too, you know, does it track how often songs are aired on your station? Does it allow you to kind of do a bit of an audit and then maybe kind of, you know, go and actually suggest new and alternatives to program makers who are kind of always going for, you know, Elvis Presley or something like that? And then the final one, which Chris is going to talk about in just a second in much more detail, is a radio scheduling or automation software, which is essentially a platform that you can add music and other audio to, like maybe promos and sponsorships, CSAs. And it basically loads or suggests songs to air based on the program time, the program or time of day, and also the music preferences of that program, and also what's already been aired. So it can be a healthy way to get that really good rotation and diversity into your playlists. But again, it can also, you know, provide a bit of a, you know, the challenges that have already been laid out in the above methods, as well as, you know, the big one is as well, are you taking advantage of the features that this particular scheduling software has? You know, the potentially it might have a feature that suggests songs based on the program preferences, and if so, are you using that, or are you basically just, you know, using it as a glorified jukebox, as Chris kind of coined before? So yeah, right now I think it is a really good time, because we think this might be a really good way for stations to kind of look at ways to kind of diversify and really kind of get the most out of their library. So Chris is going to go through the radio scheduling software.
Great, and I'm just curious to recap before we go into that. Danny, what were the results of the poll? Many of you would have been invited to fill out a poll before you came on to the webinar today.
Spoiler alert, mate, I haven't even run the poll yet.
Oh, okay.
May I do so now?
Yeah, I'd say let's run the poll now, and let's take a moment, guys. There's a poll that's open right now, and we'd like you to fill it in. We'll get back to it later with the results, but really this will help us work out where your stations are at, what level and stage you're at. And while that's happening,
and it is, we've got we're up to 36% have voted now.
Oh, look, you're so close, guys. I think we'll wait for another minute while everyone fills out that poll who can.
I'll tell you what, in between the time that I've said that, we are now up to 70% of people having voted.
Look at that. All right, keep going, guys. We want to see the results.
Do it. And remember, it is multiple choice, multiple answers. So if you if your station ticks all of those boxes, you may tick all of those boxes. And we're nearly there. We're about a minute or so that we've had it open. We look to be, there we go. We were sort of stopping there at 79%, but we've just gone up to 87%. Can we make it to the 100%? Do it!
Well, Chelsea and I aren't going to fill it out, so I don't think you'll get there.
Yeah, you guys might be at 13%. All right, I'll give people another 5 seconds to vote, and then I will close the poll. And 3, 2, 1. Poll is closed at 90% vote, so that's pretty good.
Fantastic. Look at that. All right. What are the results, Danny?
71% have a physical CD library of music. 46% have a database listing what is in said music library. 37% have a digital library to store and find songs. And 57% a digital scheduling / playout system.
Yes. Interesting. Okay. Fantastic. That's good. So just over half have radio scheduling or automation software.
And Tanya from UNE has just stated that.
Sure. Just getting started on things. Okay, great. Okay. It might be a bit controversial. Some people might disagree with me, and that's fine. It's community radio. It's what it's all about. But I genuinely think, from working in the sector with dozens of stations, managing a station myself for over the last 15 years being in the sector, that stations can get their competitive edge, achieve a music mission, and also create great opportunities to educate and support program makers through using radio scheduling software in an appropriate way. And I preface that by saying a radio scheduling software can be used for good, or it could be used for evil, depending on how open the process is around what it's doing, why it's doing it, and what music that results in being available. So I want to step through that one first, and then we'll go towards the physical CD library at the end. Okay, so by definition, really, the way a radio scheduling software works is that you import the music and you add custom song details, genre, subgenre, mood, etc. You can add the gender of the singer, all sorts of things, custom fields of your choosing. Then the software schedules songs to specific times of the day to reflect your music mission. This is what we'd like it to do, but the big question is if you have it right now, do you have a music mission at your station? Does it clearly outline your purpose? And is your scheduling software actually aligned with that? So the way that the software decides what to schedule is that you set genre preferences for specific programs or the time of day. So for example, if you have a program that likes playing a lot of blues, you might select them to receive blues music during their program. If your station likes to focus on blues, roots and country during the day, then you could set that as a general thing across the daytime programming. And then you can also set the genre preferences on what you don't want. So for example, you might say that you don't want any dance music being put on during the day, but it will only be placed on programs that actually want to play dance music. So that's step one. Step two is usually roughly you're setting global rules, okay? And a lot of these scheduling systems have these global rules, but once again, the question is, are they meeting your mission? So for example, with these rules, you could set it up to schedule new music or the least played tracks first. And that's very important and a very helpful way to make sure that your music is diverse and fresh. One thing I'll jump in on, there's a lot of talk around the prices and options with music scheduling software and radio scheduling software. There are free ones available as paid ones out there. And we'll touch on a couple of them later, but by all means, throw up the suggestions. It's great. We want to have more. At the end of this, it'd be great if the comments box was full of all the different types that people have come across and whether they think they're good or not. Okay, so as I mentioned, you set your music preferences or preferences for time of day, and then you can set global rules to make sure that it will schedule new music or the least played tracks first. For example, you might do it to help schedule at least 30% Australian music each hour in the hope that you're at least hitting your 25% Australian music quota. You might have it place at least 40% female vocalists every day. That's something that a lot of stations actually forget about, the idea that, you know, maybe you don't want to just hear guys singing all day long on a radio station. It might be good to have a mix. Relaxed music can be set to only, to play between midnight and 6 a.m., for example, so that you know that you're not playing those high energy rocking songs late at night when people want to chill out. So once you've set up your rules and your genre preferences, ideally in keeping with your music mission, then each hour of the day has a schedule of songs. Now here's the big question for the station. You can then establish on a per program basis what is done with that music. And here's 3 examples. For example, you could establish that certain programs can replace all of the scheduled songs. In other words, they have 100% personal music choice. So even though they walk into the studio and there's a schedule of songs in front of them, they don't have to play any of those because the purpose of their program is for them to personally select music, and in their personal choices, you know they're keeping on track with the music mission. They know that they're supporting your overall music strategy, and they know that, and you know that they are taking advantage of your music library and other methods to gather music. So that's the first one, which a lot of community stations have. Basically, the program maker chooses every single song. The next tier is to have a mix, and the mix that we'd suggest that can work at stations is that if you have programs who apply to do a talk show or a gardening show or a film show or a general news show, they may have skills in those areas, but maybe them selecting all of the music based on their personal choice is going to be a challenge for the station. Maybe it's not going to help meet the music mission. Maybe they don't have enough music on hand. Maybe they don't really have enough music expertise or access to the library. That's when you'd kick in something like this, which is to perhaps classify that program as a general music program, rather than being a specialist music program with 100% choice. Give that program general music and give them the opportunity to replace 1 in 3 of the scheduled songs with a personal choice. So you can give them some choice and opportunity to put their own stamp on it, but at the same time, you want to make sure that those other 2 scheduled songs are getting played because they're helping you meet your music mission. They're helping you maintain quotas. They're helping you keep the library fresh. And what goes to air fresh. Then the third option is that you tell program makers that they have to air all the scheduled songs. Look, personally, I wouldn't recommend you doing that. I think that it's good to allow people to have some choice and flexibility on their programs. There might be certain shows where they're happy just to play what's on the catalogue. But what's important is if you have either the second or the third option at your station, you need to meet the program makers halfway and make sure that the music that is appearing on those schedule is at least on a base level in keeping with music genres they're interested in, or at least removing those genres that perhaps they really do dislike. If they don't want to have like commercial pop or folk, maybe you can negotiate and remove that from their playlist and place those genres more heavily in other times of day. That's the approach that we'd see with radio scheduling software, because the advantage is that as music comes into your station, you can add it to the catalogue, and then you can massage the scheduling process to encourage discovery, to encourage diversity, and to encourage music that's going to be most effective at different times of day to get to the airwaves. Okay, so we just put up 3 options. We could have put up a gazillion, and we see that there's lots of comments that have come up with all other ones. Some of the players in radio scheduling software, RCS or radio computing software, is a pretty big one, but they're really quite expensive. I mean, you can pay up to $20,000 a year to have an RCS system, as you know, and that's a per year thing. MAirList is another one that you can pay maybe $600 to $800 up front to get a license for that. The more advanced features you can pay up to $1,500, but at least with that, it's not an annual subscription, it's a once-off one. And an interesting one that's out there that's free is called Radio DJ, that's worth exploring. But as we mentioned at the start, the idea of this session is that you can come back to us and tell us a little bit more about where your station's at, and we can recommend and give you some more advice on the specific directions that you could take. Okay, some of the other products that have been mentioned there on the list, Chelsea, yeah.
Yeah, MJM is one of them. There is also, Peter Gill said, New Zealand written station playlist. Both units are around $900. So there's also, Hank just said Music Master is another one as well, which I wonder if that's the same as, oh no, I don't think it is. Yeah, so there's a few. Music Master's been mentioned a couple of times actually, so yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's probably
Great.
worth pointing
We're
out,
also,
Danny from the CBAA here, just jumping in quickly. It's probably worth pointing out that a while ago we did a webinar in regards to scheduling software and playout systems. And one of the polls that we asked there was of the audience members of what is being used at their station and what sort of combinations. And everyone's using something different. There's no sort of standard. There's no right or wrong answer with that. I guess it's just sort of one of those things that you have to decide what is best for you at your station.
absolutely. It's worthwhile just jumping back to the first slide about radio scheduling software, just to highlight again that a lot of stations can have this software, but if you're not taking full advantage of a feature set and it's not actually aligning with what your station's true mission is, it can become an issue. Another issue that can happen with it, if we're honest with ourselves as a sector, is that someone at the station becomes the person who looks after the scheduling software, and they may have a really good idea of it, but they tend to steer it towards their preferences, their personal preferences, and what they think their idea of the station is. That can become problematic as well. Another reason why having a clear music mission is so important. And then the final aspect with the scheduling software to watch out for is if you just take them purpose-built, often they're designed with commercial radio in mind, and that's not necessarily going to keep a competitive edge for you against the streaming services. So just playing the hits is not necessarily going to have as much strength for the radio market as it used to. What will actually work, if you want to find a middle ground, is to play the other great songs by those artists that are lesser heard. So there's still some sense of connectivity there between the listener. There's still a through line historically, but you're actually serving up music that isn't just the big obvious hits. So as I mentioned, these things can be used for good or for evil, which is why we wanted to really stress that we hope you go away from this and start working through the idea of a music mission and then how the scheduling software can work into that. Okay, now next up, working backwards on our list of library types, of course, there's the digital music library. Pretty straightforward. You import the tracks and add details. Program makers can search it by genre, artist, or track, etc. And generally, people go digging for the music they know, and they play only what they know. And unless you actually take advantage of creating playlists based on music preferences, or automatically import music based on genre or other details, you're not really going to encourage much discovery within a digital music library. The other thing that comes from it is, sure, you could ask someone to sort the catalogue by the newest across a genre. That's a good way to see what's just been added to the catalogue, but it's not really an effective way to massage what's been on air and what should be placed next or over the next few hours or the coming week to make sure that you're getting the balance right. So the obvious digital music libraries are things like iTunes, Windows Media Player, and VLC. I would say that given that over half of the attendees here have scheduling software, I think that that's something that we'd be encouraging more and more stations to take on and really focus on making the most of those. Okay, we'll go through the other database types, the other library types just quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And I noticed as well, just want to point out, Sharon mentioned that she has a newsletter where she includes all of the new music that she's put on for the week. And you are totally on the money there. And we're actually going to get to that in a little while. So you're kind of jumping the gun, but it's good to see that you're already doing that at 1FM. So as Chris mentioned, we're now going to go through the other two types, which the first up one is the database. So this is basically a list of all of the music in your library and physical libraries as well. And so whichever form of database that you decide to use, because there are so many different ways that you can kind of collate all of this information into a format that is accessible for both program makers inside and outside of the station. No matter what it is, it's really important for this database to tick all of the following boxes. Most importantly, it needs to be updated regularly. If it doesn't reflect what is in the libraries, both the physical and the digital libraries at the current moment, then your program makers are probably going to be turned off to the idea of using it to discover new editions, because they might potentially lose a bit of faith in it. Ideally, as I just kind of touched on, it should be accessible for both people inside and outside of the station, so that program makers who may potentially spend the bulk of their time organizing and really putting their program together at home can actually go through and see what's been added to the library, and so kind of, you know, build their program based on that. And also, it must be easy to navigate so that the program makers can, you know, discover and select appropriate music for their program. Consider if it's user-friendly. Is it something that you can filter quite easily, you know, by genre or by new edition or by gender, as Chris touched on a little earlier? Does it contain also, you know, the most important and useful information about the release as well? You know, it could be potentially like, you know, guest musicians, the composer, if it's a classical piece, something, anything that's going to, you know, the information basically that program makers are going to need when they go to air with these particular releases. All right, so this is, I guess, a kind of checklist of things that you should be, you know, putting into the database when you're putting it together. I noticed that I think it was Tanya that said that she's putting together, she's in the process of putting together a database at the moment because they don't have one. So I definitely think it's important to include the following things straight off the bat, and probably most obviously, artist name and release name. Without spelling mistakes, I must say as well. Otherwise, people aren't going to be able to find, you know, the artists and the music, sorry, that they're wanting to find. The year of the release as well, because that might actually pertain to things that, you know, that might actually pertain, sorry, to certain programs that might play a you know, a specific selection of music from a specific era, or even, you know, new music as well. The main genre is also quite important, and by main genre, we also acknowledge here at AMRAP that, you know, it can be quite hard to essentially to kind of put releases into one main genre. Today, there are so many, particularly when we look at, we work with musicians here at AMRAP, you know, musicians are generally kind of crossing so many different boundaries when it comes to genres. And so what we suggest is that when you process the music and it arrives at your station, it's really important to, I guess, you know, basically, you know, define what the main genre is. What is the genre that it pertains to the most? And this could also be highlighted by the artist themselves on the media release or the bio that they may provide with their release. You know, they may actually specify what genre they would like to actually, you know, identify themselves as. So that makes your job just a little bit easier. But it's really important, particularly for those genre-based programs, to actually have that information. And relevant subgenres comes into it too, because then you can expand a little bit more. So for instance, if it's a jazz release, but it's got elements of, you know, funk and soul or something like that, you can definitely go and do that to give your program makers a better idea of what they can expect from that release, and basically intrigue them. It's a good way to entice them to check out that release. Okay, next up, is it in the physical, digital, or digital library, or is it in both? You know, make sure you let program makers know exactly where they can find the music that they're looking at. And also, just as a bit of an extra, and this obviously is only if whatever method you use, whether it be, you know, Excel or some other kind of software, like I think Collectors was one that I've heard of as well. If you have a field where you're able to put notes in, it's a really good idea. It could actually be really good to maybe put in like a bit of a forward announce or a back announce that your program makers can use on air. So it'd be basically, you know, making it easier for them to talk about the releases that they're playing, and essentially give a bit more clarity for the listeners as well.
Andrew asked what sort of database we'd use. Chelsea just touched on one that's called Collectors. It ends with a Z or a Z, not an S. That appears to be quite a useful one that's online. One thing that you want to be looking at with these databases, if you're going to go to the effort of creating it, is to try to make sure that it can be accessible from people's homes outside of the station, because you could spend a lot of time updating this thing and very few people actually look at it or dig through it, let alone actually get to listening to the music and deciding whether they want to play it. It is one of the big challenges, we must say, around the radio scheduling software, is that by and large, it's not easy for program makers to access those outside of the station. But I think that software will develop pretty rapidly around that. And I think that in the future, we'll start to see a scenario where program makers, through radio automation software and scheduling software, are able to log in and look at what schedule's coming up on their show and make some changes before they come in to the studio. But as soon as you can see, as we drill down away from radio automation towards these sorts of databases, you're running the risk that you put in a lot of work and it doesn't necessarily result in any further discovery. Which brings us to the last area, which we are going to touch on just very quickly, which is the physical library. The reason why we'll touch on it quickly is because we do feel that we're now at this crossover point as a sector, as an industry, and as music fans, that we are going to be able to best serve our listeners if we move towards having digital libraries and having scheduling software. So let's look quickly at the reality, though, that we still have CD libraries and they are still of value.
Yeah, for sure. And they are definitely still of value, but I guess, as Chris mentioned, they can be a little bit labor intensive. And so just a few quick pointers. If you're not already doing this with your physical library, these are just some really quick suggestions on how you can really kind of organize it to, give it its kind of best potential and as easy of access as you can possibly make it. So one of the main things that we kind of suggest is to section off your physical library by genre, and you can do this by using different colored stickers that you put on each spine of the CD when they come into the station, so that people can, go to specific genre areas and look at the new releases. The next thing is the order of your physical library is also really important, particularly if your database isn't quite there, or if you're still working on it, or maybe there could be a whole host of other things. But essentially, if your physical library is in an order that potentially is from oldest to the most recent editions, and again, recent editions doesn't mean potentially new music as in released within the last year, it's just recent editions that have been added to your library, then the presenters and program makers who spend time at the station maybe before their show goes to air would probably appreciate this order a lot more, and it would give them an opportunity to check out these recent editions and make it easier for them, particularly maybe if they're not as computer savvy as others. Another thing that we suggest, which it very much depends on what you receive when you get the CDs into the station, but when I was a music director at Eastside, I used to keep a binder of all of the extra material where next to the station library, so that basically program makers could go through that and take out the relevant press releases or bios pertaining to the release that they're looking at, so that they can use it on air. That can give them information that they can use to promote what it is that they're playing, and give them a bit of background and context as well, so that helps them make maybe a bit more of an informed decision when it comes to choosing music that they're going to play. Another thing that we think is really quite important and will probably make all the difference with a physical library is to establish a new release box or shelf in your on-air studio, because this is where your program makers are obviously going to spend a lot of their time when they're in the station. And it's really useful because it really pushes out more variety to air. We really suggest, I guess, rotating this particular shelf or box, whatever it is, roughly about once per month, but maybe you could do it a bit more frequently depending on the bulk of music and how much music you get into your station. And by rotating it, you can actually use it in tandem with an Australian music shelf as well, or box as well. So once a release has been on the new release shelf or in the box for a while, then you can move it back to the main library. But if it's Australian, then you can actually put it in the Australian release shelf. So it gives it a little bit more life, gives it a bit more chance to be played on air, and thus kind of, you know, promoting it further to more program makers. And then, of course, moving it all back to the main library. It's also really important to keep up with your ACMA quota as well.
That's great. So out of interest, we're at like the survey says that 71% of you guys have a physical CD library. Can you just give me a yes in the message box if you still think it's useful for people to be able to access CDs at your station? Even if you have a digital library or scheduling software, yes, 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 fantastic. Okay, yeah, sure.
Whole bunch of yeses going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, that's good. Okay. So here's one strategy that you can take to manage your music to try to get the best of both worlds.
My pleasure.
Get some radio scheduling software. Establish it to actually work around the rules that and to support your music mission and your program's skills. So if a program maker is a specialist music program, then by all means let them choose all the music they want and let the schedules spit up suggestions that they can ignore. But if their program is more a talks-based show where music isn't their focus, then use the scheduling software to your advantage to ensure that you're getting music up to them. When music arrives at the station, hopefully you have a pool of volunteers or a committee who looks at what music could be useful and suitable and matches the mission. If it matches the mission, go ahead and add 1 to 3 tracks from an album, from an artist's album, to your scheduling software. No need to go and add the entire album. It's better to add more music by more artists than to add more songs by individual artists. Okay, once you've identified and added 1 to 3 tracks from the CD, and you've added that into the scheduling software, you then have the option of putting it into a database. But the other thing you could just do is take advantage of the tips that Chelsea gave around the CD arrangement and skip the database and go straight to a physical CD library where you're placing them in order from newest to oldest and by genre. By all means, you could have genre stickers if you wanted to, and you could write the date on the spine of the album by way of keeping it in some semblance of an order. Now, the reason why I'm suggesting that you skip maybe having a database where you type in a whole heap of information is that if your physical library is accessible and it's organized by genre and the CDs have the date written on them and a genre sticker, and you rotate those CDs into your on-air studio, then people will be able to discover them. The other thing that you'll find is that you'll be able to go to your radio scheduling software and get reports on which artists are being played a lot, get reports on which songs aren't being played a lot because people are skipping them or disliking them. And that helps you then know what you could do with those physical CDs. For example, you might go, all right, well, people are really liking that artist and they've played those 3 songs that we added a lot and maybe it's a bit too much. So you can go back to the CD, add another couple of tracks to the computer scheduling software and either delete or hide the first 3 tracks that you added. At the heart of it, it's all about music discovery. And if you create your physical library in such a way that someone goes, I'm into country music, When I wander into the station, I go to the country shelf, I'll grab a bunch of the new country CDs, I'll whack them in a CD player, I'll have a listen. If I like it, I'll play it on my show. Then you've done your job. The database itself, I think some people at stations, the librarian dilemma, can get really caught up in arranging this database. But really, all that matters is whether people are discovering music. And discover music, if it's a CD, they've got to pick it up. And really, the only people that are going to dig through the database are people who are looking for something specific. Now, I know the big reason why a lot of us had these databases was so that we could find that important album by that artist at that time if it was important to play music by them for whatever reason. Without having the database, you run the risk of losing that. But there are plenty of other ways that people can find that music and discover it, and plenty of other ways that you could dig that music out to play on air if you needed to. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go back and search through 10 years of CDs in a library to find that CD. So I think that this middle step is, you know, in terms of being practical about what you can achieve at your station. If you want to keep CDs, make sure you're rotating them and making them available, and move towards your scheduling software to create a future and to create really interesting choices for your station. Okay, sorry, I'm distracted. Thanks, Alan. Back to you, Charles.
All good. So we've kind of gone through the different types of libraries now, so you should be, you know, well across it, and also, you know, thinking about these in the context of your own station. But all of this effort is kind of lost if there is no communication about your library to your program makers. If they don't know about the new additions that you've put into this library, or even how they can find it or where they can find it, then, as Master Yoda says, it's a communication breakdown and a path to the dark side. So I couldn't let this go without a Star Wars meme. Danny appreciates that, I know for a fact. So the first step
the Star Wars meme, by the way. Thank you.
I knew it. All right. So the first step is to consider what will be the best method to inform your program makers about these new additions and the updates to your music library. So there's three main ones, I guess, that seem to be, thanks, Hank, that seem to be pretty common amongst a number of different stations. The first one is, of course, email. And I know I'm sorry, I've forgotten who mentioned it a bit earlier about the e-news. I think it was you, Sharon. But essentially, you know, if you have a regular update for your program makers that goes out via email, it's a great platform to potentially add a list of new additions to the library so that they can see it and it intrigues them. To give them as much information about them is probably a better thing. But then also, it's good to consider whether or not, you know, are your program makers big on email? Do they tend to read them? You know, these are things that you need to consider when you are making these decisions. Another thing which could be effective is putting a printed list up in the station, but it really falls if you don't update it. So, you know, but it is also a really good physical presence for your program makers, so they can check it out when they're in the station. Again, could also include information like a bit of a brief description or a genre or anything that might pique their interest. Another one which I find really interesting, and I'm not sure how many stations do this. I know Eastside tends to do it at the moment as well, but a Facebook group may be the answer as well if you have that one. I mean, we have a high number of people across a whole bunch of different demographics that are Facebooking mad, and if you have that particular platform, then and you have a social media savvy group of program makers, why not post it on a platform that they probably spend a lot of time on? You can upload PDF files into groups if you create a group for all of your volunteers and program makers at the station. You can also create, you know, just posts and maybe post them in there if that's what you want to do. It's good to kind of level with your program makers and really try and, you know, find the easiest method of communication. All right. So again, to reiterate, you know, your communication is really only as effective as your catalog. So if your catalog is not organized, and accessible, you know, and usable, then no real amount of communication is probably going to help you. You know, another thing too is the access to information. You know, a weekly email isn't going to work, as some of you said, if some of your program makers don't have email, if they don't use email. And printouts, if they're not updated, are also going to be a bit of a waste of paper and also time. And also people's desire to, you know, discover is another thing. You know, the greatest library and communications will probably still fail if broadcasters aren't prepared to play new music, or at least reduce repeating the same songs, which is really where your mission, your music mission, really comes into play. If you can really go through that and really hone that into your program makers and they can get on board with that, then that's what's going to really make all the difference.
Okay, so at this point you'd be going, okay, who's going to do all of this work? We've got a couple of roles that we suggest. You have your station library coordinator, which may be one person, or ideally it's good if it's never just one person. It's good if there's a couple of people. But one thing that's helpful to have as many new music coordinators as you can muster, as many people as you can getting involved in that, because it's a defined role that can give people a lot of satisfaction, at the same time being a useful way that they can contribute to keeping things ticking along with the station. So the responsibilities of the new music coordinators, this is how we define it, is to process new releases at your station, both digital and physical. The tasks include identifying and labeling CDs when they arrive, placing them in the new music shelf, ripping the new files onto the computer if needs be. And we've got an outline here, as you can see, that we are generally, that's about 30 minutes per week of volunteer role, volunteer time to get that done. Now, the good thing about having at least 2 volunteers is that you can share the workload, and if one leaves, then the existing one can teach a new person and so on. Station library coordinator is more looking at the rotation of the new music at the station and to inform program makers of new addition to the library. So they're overseeing the new music coordinators to keep on top of the music as it comes in, and they're processing the music. They're adding the music to the shelves and rotating those releases over, and also communicating to the program makers about what's in there. We'd also say that tasks in the station library coordinator is to look at how the scheduling software is going. You might find that you could split this into 2 roles. You could have someone who's doing the physical library and someone who's actually looking at the catalogue and the scheduling of music and how that's fitting in. Okay, in terms of finding music, as you may know, you can access that from AMRAP. We have to put in a little promo here. AMRAP's Air It, an online music catalog. You can order music for airplay. And there's also the AMRAP monthly CD mail-out service, where we're still sending CDs to stations. Once a month you receive a hand-picked selection of music that we hope suits your genre. If you're receiving CDs that don't suit your genre, then you're able to send us an email or go and change your preferences just by going to the CBAA website and going through to the AMRAP CD mail-out section. Okay, now there's one final thing that's quite useful to consider when looking at music library management, and that's how you can monitor your airplay, what actually gets played on the other side. Many of you said CDs are still important, so that will mean that and also presenters are still going to bring in their own music and make their own choices, perhaps off using personal computers and whatnot. So you can never really rely 100% on your radio automation or scheduling software to give you the big true picture of what's getting to air. So it's one of the many reasons why we created AMRAP pages, which enable program makers to create playlists and post it to the station website or to a Facebook page. And in adding in what they play, the station can generate reports and see instantaneously what their programs are playing. And when the program maker adds songs to their playlist, their AMRAP page will search the internet to bring back artist images, videos, and information to match the music that they've aired, so that they're able to encourage listeners to check out the website or their Facebook page to look at the content that matches the music that they've put to air. So that's also a useful tool. We do work with stations who have automation software, who also have CD libraries, and still have every radio program voluntarily log their playlists through AMRAP pages, because it's a really useful way for the station to get the big picture on things. Okay, so now we want to hear from you. Really, we'd like to get emails from you guys. Tell us what purpose your station library currently serves. How do they know where they can find new additions, and what are the communication methods? You don't have to tell us what you're currently doing. You could just even send us an email and tell us what you'd like to do. Let's open it up to questions now. I wonder, Chelsea and I have been quite busy jumping back and forth here, Danny. Are there some highlight questions that need to be looked at?
Well, we've had 20 minutes over time at the moment, so I might sort of make these things a bit quick so people can get out of there. If you guys wouldn't mind just typing your email addresses into the instant message box, because then people are able to get in touch with you. They can just copy and paste it from there. We have a few things here. There was quite a bit of discussion there in regards to the scheduling software. Michael Hayes commented that he writes his own scheduling software, which handles sales of sponsor slots with invoices through to scheduling announcements, as well as CSAs, etc., etc. So that's great. Peter Gill, who knows a thing or two about the scheduling software, let me tell you, is working in conjunction with Ian Hill to write a software guide for the CMTO. In regards to the scheduling stuff. So that'll be really interesting to get our hands on that one. A few questions in regards to, is there software that suggests playlists based on profiles? I'd suggest there's heaps and heaps of that, but our role as community broadcasting music creators is to be the brains behind that, to not let the computer tell us what is good. I could be wrong there. You guys might have a different opinion of that. But that is, I think, pretty much it. But please do keep in mind there's been some fairly robust conversations going on in the instant message box tonight with all of the things that's going on. Thanks to Chelsea for putting through her email address there. Thanks to everyone else for putting their email addresses up. Hopefully, I think we've got all of those in our different databases and whatnot. But what a great bunch of people who are here tonight. If I have forgotten any questions, you can email me, dchifley@cbaa.org.au. But I'd suggest that possibly we might need to wind it up, guys. Sorry about that. What an absolutely excellent session. Is anyone here? Is anyone listening to me at the moment, I wonder? I'll be able to listen to the recording.
Thanks.
It'll be
Thanks
Denny.
for sticking it out, guys.
Be Denny.
You can email Chelsea on mailout@amrap.org.au.
Then waiting for the void. The void did respond back. Excellent. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. What an absolutely cracker session. It always happens when we get the AMRAP people involved, whether it's the webinars or it's a conference session or any other thing. They do a whole bunch of great work. And it's absolutely wonderful to work with those guys. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Thanks to Chelsea.
Thanks, Danny.
From AMRAP. What a pair of bloody legends. Thanks to the CMTO, Healy over there at the CMTO, who's been offering a bit of technical assistance. cmto.org.au for more. Please go to cbaa.org.au to sign up for our e-news if you're not signed up already, and that's where you can get the good oil on what is going to be next in our series of CBAA webinars. Please keep in mind, as stated before, that we are at the end of the season at the moment, but the off-season only goes for about 1 week. And we will be back in touch with everyone there in the community broadcasting sector before too long to let them know what our next webinar is going to be, and that will be taking place on the last Wednesday of July, unless I'm very much mistaken. And please keep in mind, I've been mistaken before. This is Danny Chifley on behalf of the CBAA. signing off. Farewell to Emma Couch. You're the bomb, baby.